Welcome everyone to this webinar. Very pleased to sort of really do this webinar for advanced agility. So to talk a little bit about my background, so I want to take a few minutes to talk about myself. Um, I'm a business agility coach, worked in various domains in consulting, and I've delivered many programs. And in past few years, I've been working as a coach, helping products and teams to sort of really, cater to agile ways of working. My specialization including learning and helping mentoring at various level, and I also sort of really uh, teach not just for the IT perspective, but I also take up the other aspects like it could be about architecture, it could be about programming. So just want to make sure that I want to bring in my experience. And today it's a very interesting day that we're going to talk about product management through a amazing case study, which is going to be talking about Kodak rise and fall journey, right? Now, what all happened with Kodak is a snapshot to give us an idea as to how we need to sort of really align and change tactics, in terms of how we approach a business problem and how we need to sort of have the mindset to change, during the time that really matters. Now, what really happened to Kodak is a great experience to sort of really learn this case study. Nevertheless, we are in 2024, but this case study is an eye opener for anyone who likes to participate and understand what is it that really matters in any era, is to sort of really understand what would be the turning point and how we can change and align to the market needs. Perfect example as to how we need to be agile in terms of our mindset. And this example of this case study is no different to that. Now, if you really go back to the era of early 19th century, one of the really difficult thing to talk about is camera was a big deal. Making movies is even more big deal. Why? Because highly inaccessible to public, required technical and professional experience and expertise. Somebody who wants to do this, they have to sort of really learn the aspect of how to use the film, and it's a lengthy and a complicated and time-consuming aspect as to you get ready and then sort of set up, and the whole mechanical aspect of setting up a camera is quite cumbersome, and that means people who are affordable can only take the digital camera. That was the kind of era it all started, and it required also special type of chemicals nevertheless, and people have to be knowledge, yes, and they should work in that for like at least 2 to 3 years to do a setup and to create that so that your pictures are brilliant, right? So, and hence, camera was quite an expensive at the early 19th century. Now, if you really look at photography market, right, it started to become entertainment in the early 19th century towards, and it became such an important thing that the power of entertainment, the power of storytelling became what the market started to, go towards. And people wanted to sort of really have those weekends and enjoy their time with loved ones and going to theaters. The old ways of working was to sort of have theaters, and they wanted something cinematic, and that was then started, right? People had a desire to have an access to these things. So at the time, the major market players, Jirao and George Knight, right? And it's all something that someone should able to afford. Um, at the time, it's quite expensive to afford. And these were the only cameras available. And you need to know the process, how to set up, how to use it to be a photographer. Now, this was a great opportunity for anyone to start business. So that was when we had Kodak. So George Eastman, 1988, sort of, made it so accessible and had a huge success in terms of widespread, in terms of amateur photography. People started to, use this, and in hundred by the 100 years, we were able to have the mass market production of this Kodak camera. And you press the button, you have it, everything recorded, and you have the reel, and people were, and kept that as a photo albums as to who they really are. The people who were born in 1980s and 1960s, people of photography, people never really had digital photography at that point. So we all used the reels, and that was the era, delightful era. And then we had initially the black and white, and then we moved to the color photography. Now Kodak really became more innovative, and at the time right, in terms of buying a chemical industry at Tennessee, and also they started to sort of really outpace in the marketplace. There were no one at the time to compete with them because not just they had the reel, but they also had the premium technology sort of really capture that and special ability of that lenses and the camera setup was quite simple and it became like a mass market leader in terms of what they sold, right? Now, this led to sort of really expansion of Kodak in various different forms. One is that, they started their own research laboratory. Kodak has become a very big player in the industry. So they had established chemical factory for the reels. So this led to that rise of that Kodak in the early 20th century. So photography passion for people across the world going different places capturing became affordable aspect to the public from unaffordable in early 18th 19th century and becoming more affordable to early 21st century. And Kodak was a popular brand to pick up anywhere and it was easily accessible. And through this innovation, it became more profitable. And now we need to sort of really understand at this point, what are some of the factors that led to this thing? So the first launch of the roll films and portability of that camera, impact of branding and marketing campaign, extensive research and robust distribution centers across the and overall perspective, the people who came really loved what they did at the time. Now, this had a huge impact in the marketplace and it became like a household name. So if you talk about Kodak, Kodak was known, everybody owned them, right? And like if you look at from sustainability perspective, employees to photography to becoming more of market leader. So it became sort of, a rise of Kodak. And now let's take a look back and deeply understand about the financial because this really proves how successful Kodak was. Because without financials, we will not be able to say how successful Kodak really got into. So at the time in the US market, so if you really look at, so it reached a point of sales up to $1 billion in 1962. So it reached that pinnacle point of making as mass majority product. And at this point in time, the annual revenue exceeded over 10 billion in 1980. So you can actually imagine a company which started with, uh, you know, as a small company with use of plastic and use of chemicals to come up with this film. Now it has become a major market player in 1980s. You can imagine that it has become quite a huge rise. Now, if you can compare this to that of now GM Motors, now if you really compare this company, today's GM Motors is worth 20 billion, right, on the paper. So if you really look at the annual sales, right, it's 10 billion, right? So in 1996, it reached up to $16 billion. So the financial can tell you where the Kodak was really placed. So at the time, um, the competition was quite less. There were no competitors at this point in time. So so slowly the shift was towards the digital market, right? So so competitors started to thrive in with Japan having Sony, Canon, Nikon, and Fujifilm started to present themselves with the digital perspective and significantly having influence in the consumer photography sector. And Canon and Nikon focused on high-end cameras and optics, right? So, which had a huge impact as to how the traditional photography with camera reels versus the digital photography. And slowly there was a shift in terms of how competitors started to shift towards, digital photography rather than the reels, and people started to accept that and go towards that digital photography because we don't have to use the reels. Now, now if you really think about this, that was a big turning point because the electrical engineers at Kodak had come up with this smart technology to use the digital photography, but within the leadership, they did not know how to sort of really convert that and bring it forward. So the product was actually discontinued or not taken forward with respect to research, but they were the one who were pioneer at actually creating this photography. Now, this led to the massive, revenue drops. And in terms of, going from all the way from 16 billion, this led to the fall of Kodak. And people started to not use reels because they just simply felt it's most cumbersome to actually take it out and then get it printed and put this into physical copy rather than keeping it in the soft copy that was something that people started to, think about it, like, why should we really spend? Or it's so cumbersome that we have to use ultimately printing. We have to, get it to the proper size and utilize and keep it in the photo albums. What if there is a way that we can use a digital photography? Now, this led to the, rise of digital era, where so this innovation that was, carried out at Kodak, simply the executives at the leadership dropped the idea of using, the Kodak digital photography. So that led to the rise of the Sony Fuji camera and the other camera technology that became quite famous, and people started to accept that. And so, Kodak was not really about embracing that new sense of, going towards a new technology, but there was a resistance from the leadership not to accept that because they did not familiar with that sort of technology, and then they thought people would not accept that. They made a bad decision about it. So now, if you really look at it from that perspective, as in when you have a resistance, what would happen is you deeply start to think about, what would happen to your lucrative business. So Kodak started to sort of really see the change in the evolving market and potentially like started to lose a lot of marketplace in terms of how their reels or the camera which were presented and lose the market to these technology, right? Now competitors started to thrive in, and Sony, Canon, Nikon rapidly advanced digital camera and technology, and SLR started to roll up in the camera and the space, and then in terms of how you capture and how you store it, completely changed because of the competitors. Now, although Kodak really tried to again come back and post digital camera and the smartphones, but simply there was that they had to work with the vendors such as Flextronics. They invested a lot of money into this space, but I think there was, despite the intense competition, the Kodak could cease to exist in terms of uh, from the era of like early 19th century to now 2009. They started to sort of really have that um, taken a pushback in terms of how they approach that decline in the sales. And the very reason is because you're not sending or you're not giving the right products at the right time. And one of the things was technology was very old, and the other thing is the model looked very not so, in terms of competition, they were never placed with delightful sort of customer experience in terms of how you use, because it looked quite old. The photos that was reeled out was not to the experience of that of Sony or a Fuji camera. So people started to feel that there is no point, even though the brand is great, but they didn't get you know the work done or maybe the quality of that pictures. So that's when people started to look for the other brands. Now this was the reason why Kodak had to really fall. And slowly, if we really look at um, competitors and dominating and emerging markets, reluctance to move away from the profitable firm. So simply we started to look at how Kodak can season and bring use of brands, other brands, to sort of really use a way to get into digital photography became quite a difficult task for the Kodak. So there was a huge investment, a lot of debts, but there are no outcomes in terms of producing the right set of camera to the customers. So at this point in time, the executives at the top started to talk to the vendors and then try to think about what we can do to sort of really upsell, because the revenue started to plummet, and there was a huge shift in terms of margins, and Kodak was unable to resist and to sort of accept the fact that they had to start taking borrowings and go towards the vendors and to attract them and to make sure that they stay with the brand and use that brand to sort of use that as a way of mechanism, brand it and sell it. Now at this point in time, Sony, Canon, and Nikon aggressively you know got into the digital camera technology quickly. The place where they started to sort of really look at how we can um, you know adapt to these technology, and then sort of really bringing the pioneering and also use of digital um, processing, which meant that you can process the cameras at a rate which uh, Kodak could not process, or the technology that the Kodak used, the processors and the lenses were not up to the mark. And also the technology like EOS series, and also they could never match to that the quality. So one of the things that we have to really look at here is how your competitor does the business, even if you're not giving to the extent of your competitor, but at least you need to think about, how I can really provide a similar to that sort of product, at least helps you to sort of survive in the market. But at this point in time, they had a lack of technology. They had to depend on a lot of vendors. Everything has to be sourced from vendors to actually build a camera, and service was actually not good at the time because they didn't own up all that. And one more thing was that the processor and the technology was quite similar to that of Sony or a Fujifilm because it was a cutting edge new processor taking overload, ability to sort of go through the battery manufacturing. So those were something that was taken aback for the Kodak in terms of how they could not match to the demands of you know, and people liked Kodak as a brand. There was a much acceptance in the market, but the brand did not bring value in terms of, what camera was sold at. So that is when, these cameras become quite successful in sort of digital space. And that led to the sort of, real downfall of Kodak and why it could not even survive even for a very few years post 2000 era. So if you really look back at everything, so you need to create like a supply chain. If you really look at how you can bring a camera or a technology of that nature, that means you need to know how do you assemble the peripherals. You need to understand how we can manufacture lenses. You need to also sort of really look at the way you can adapt to the new ways of working. So that means not only executives, it is important that um, people within the organization also have to think about how they can resist or what is happening to our technology space, and we need to create a supply chain, and that's when we can actually circumvent the supply chain problem. So Kodak really did not get off to a great start, but they could not even establish a widespread market with digital technology because either they had an issue with the vendor supplying the poor quality processor, or it was also the fact that um, the technology did not match the existing market products, one of their problems, and they could not give good service at the time. So because, so that was also started to lose in terms of, in that space. So these are some of the issues that Kodak really had as to why Kodak could not match. And that's when the financials start to steep down, right? Now, if you really look at now, we want to really focus on the loss and what happened to them, and then how really they started to lose out on this. Now, it's important that any technology you need to always think about the future perspective. You need to sort of really have a vision and a roadmap. But at the time, they lacked that. The executives were used to the printing technology, were used to the reels, were used to this kind of supply chain, and they were not going for new change. So that is when it caused a lot of you know downfall for Kodak. Although they had a huge market expansion in the US and in Germany, so they had many companies and chemical factories that was established for rolls, reels, and etc. But they were just not being able to sort of really bring in new technology with the full supply chain as part of that. And either they were too late to get those features or those lenses and um, the processors, or they had to hugely depend on these processors, which were either not of a great quality or their services were not of great nature, right? So that is when if you start to look at Kodak at this point in time, they had to enter into that digital camera market. It's easy share family. So they were ranked first. They had a sale about $5.7 billion, but this high growth, uh, but had low margins because it was not as if they were making huge amount of money because you know at the same price there were better cameras available at the time. So if you really look at from 2001 to 2005, started to sort of really decline in terms of how they were doing. And it was also to be looked at as to why the decline happened actually. So initially, the Japanese companies such as Sony, Canon, they started to dominate the market. So started to reduce the share in the market space. So clearly, the superior technology of the lenses processor had huge market share in terms of how, and Kodak started to shrink in the market share. They started to see that. And so Kodak, capitalization of the market started to plummet and got declined to 7% in the ranking leaving behind Canon and Sony and Nikon. So people, if at all, if we were to review and to say that, okay, this is a great product on the magazine, people wanted to take Sony or a Nikon or um, Canon as a camera. So as a result of this, and people also started to get the cell phone. They wanted to use cell phone with camera. So simply digital camera was something that was stalled because people wanted to have portability and also to look at how you store your photography with JPEG file. And people started to sort of really use towards smartphones, and there was no era for digital camera. And financial decline happened, and during 2009 and 2013, one of the things that we have to really think about it is a company which earned close to $16 billion in 1989, close to that, towards 1996 they were like $20 billion company of annual revenue, became close towards borrowing 300 million loan from the companies, and they had to sell their license, patents, IP, intellectual property, just to make sure that they had revenue going for them. So lack of cash reserves, which led to no innovation that came because they were very uh, they were not able to invest money into any of the new type of business, and the money that was invested into the kind of technology that didn't really give them enough margins or enough profits, or even to think about the technology was not even superior, and hence they started to lose money and there were no receipts. So hence if you really look at the company at this point in time, they had to have a shift. So hence if you really think about why this all happened, it is important that we need to think about the people from the executive and the people who develop the technology and the supply chain. We need to concentrate about three aspects of it. That means, how do you establish a good supply chain? How do you really establish the right sort of technology? How do you bring the right sort of processor to have a delightful customer? Although your brand is great, but you need to sort of really have a shift in terms of going towards that. So in parallel, if you really think about it and compare this in the today's era, so there is a huge shift in terms of AI. So if you don't adapt and go towards new set of technology at this point in time, so people would have a huge loss, right, in terms of the companies that can do and sustain. So similarly, if you look at the parallels, if we can draw, the company which was not even a great company and just a startup company, if you really look at and compare even Tesla. So simply, if you see, the Kodak can be compared that it became, affordable, market leader with a camera reels in early 19th century to towards 2000. It's a $20 billion company, had to come to a situation where they had to actually borrow money for $300 million. So you can imagine, they had to sell their patents. So such a decline can only happen if you're not changing the mindset within the organization towards adapting new ways of working or new ways of thinking. So as a result of decline as to how we are going towards your product management and bringing new set of things, you would definitely go into an era where your technology would not compete with the superior technology in the marketplace. So as a result, why Kodak was not able to match the demand. One is early innovation was ignored by the company folks. Market prediction, like people did not think that it can become such a great hit because of digital technology. Strategic missteps, people were not sensing that and adopting to new ways of working, and resistant to change. So people were saying, no, this would not be a great thing. So similar to that, if you compare in parallel EV technology, so if you really compare Tesla and the other car companies, Tesla was not a great, it was not even market leader. Today it's a $1 trillion company. Similarly, you can think of, in changing times, we need to think about new set of technology, supply chain, and then sort of really look at the adaptability of those things. And these are the key things as to why Kodak could not sustain there. Knowing your own competence, what good you are in terms of marketplace, and and also understanding what does it take to sustain that. So these are some of the important questions to sort of really ask as to why Kodak could not take and the leadership towards going towards innovating those products and bringing them at the right time. Now, as a result of this, Kodak missed the opportunity that embraced the digital photography. And also, if you really look at Kodak, solely relying on traditional, film business, And Kodak could have fostered the culture for innovation and agility within the organization. Again, it lacked that steps. So those are some of the bits of parts within the organization. As to you can see, there was a complete distance between the executives and the people who developed the technology. So there was a distance in terms of how the communication happened within the organization, and hence this led to the missed opportunity or hapless situation for Kodak. Now, what we want to really look at is what is the present scenario. Now, Kodak has shifted largely their businesses into commercial printing and packages and professional services. That means they had to stick to their the chemical or the film factory that they were very good at, offering packages, function of printing, professional services, right? And they had to shift towards that. And they had to sort of adapt to you know and go towards the camera and the real technology which they had at the time, and they had to use that. So these were the only primary, aspect that the revenue is now being generated. But what we really need to think about it is the company could not adopt to different types of technology, that could have changed really the space and brought, many aspects that it was a market leader at the time and lost all the steam because they could just definitely not match the supply chain, the processing, the lenses to that of, digital camera. Although they were the pioneer of the discovery of the digital camera. So one of the things that the key takeaway out of this webinar is that you embrace the digital technology, agile and adaptability to the situation, to the new ways of thinking, being motivated, continuous innovation, and combined with executive supporting those innovation, customer-centric approach, understanding what really customers are looking and giving the right sort of situation and how you're solving the problem there, and have a strategic vision in terms of how we want to approach in terms of getting things done, in terms of road mapping. Okay, this is what I want to produce in this amount of time. So one of the key takeaways here is if you're lacking any of these things, you will not be able to get what you want, and as a result, it is quite difficult to be disruptive in that place. So now, as a conclusion, what we can really think about is it is very important to underscore an adoption to the face of technology disruption, use of operating models such as agile methodology, which would help you with in terms of how we can navigate the challenges effectively, and reluctance to sort of bring innovation and making sure that not commercializing certain types of technology and the supply chain, and not being using a right set of operating model within the organization is a crucial thing for sustainability and success in today's rapid evolving business landscape. So I think one of the things that we need to really understand is we need to make sure that we understand that what is required for the market and how the technology can be used and how your supply chain can be focused towards customer centricity. And that way you're being more responsive and adaptable and understand and empathetic towards customers. So those are the most important aspects as to how you look at um, from this aspect. Thank you so much for being part of this webinar, and appreciate being part of this webinar. Thank you.